So I wanted to make a video about the anxious attachment style, exactly what that is and how it impacts relationships, whether you're somebody with an anxious attachment style or whether you're in a relationship with someone and you're desperately trying to understand why they do the things that they do. Hi, I'm Jeff Campbell from DivorcedParentsClub.com, and I'm glad you're here with me. So I do indeed have an anxious attachment style. That is kind of my nature. I did get that way out of my childhood. I have a fear of abandonment, essentially, stemming from several events that happened in my early childhood. I'm aware of that, and I take steps to deal with that, but still, nonetheless, that is kind of my go-to, is that anxious attachment style. What are the attachment styles, if you're not already familiar with them? I became familiar with them after getting dumped, and I picked up a book called Attached that breaks down the attachment styles in great detail. It's an excellent book if you haven't read it. If you feel like you have an anxious attachment style or you're with someone who is, it's well worth picking up. I'll put a link to that book on Amazon down below in the description. But essentially there are three basic attachment styles. There is secure attachment, which is where we ideally all want to be. And that's basically where you feel whole and complete in and of yourself. You don't need someone else's validation or approval to feel good about yourself. Then you meet somebody else that's also a secure attachment style person, and then it's just two whole and complete people coming together. I do have several videos on attachment styles, particularly the avoidant attachment style, which is what my ex-wife was, and how that relates with an anxious attachment style person. I'm going to put a link to my attachment style playlist up here in the corner. But the next attachment style is the anxious attachment style, which again is what I tend to gravitate towards. And that's where you're kind of needy and clingy a little bit, and you kind of second guess everything, and you read into things, and you jump to conclusions. You're kind of nervous about being left, essentially. And that does tend to make you a little bit needy and clingy. And if you're dealing with the next attachment style, which is the avoidant attachment style, that can actually push them further away. The avoidant attachment style person often also has roots of abandonment in childhood, but instead of being clingy and needy, they learned that the best way to stay safe is to keep everyone at arm's length. So they push people away in order to feel safe and comfortable with who they are. That doesn't mean they don't want love. They desperately do want love. They just don't know how to get it because they never really let anybody in too close. And so the ideal scenario really for an avoidant attachment style person, if they can't get therapy and kind of work through their issues, is to find someone else with an avoidant attachment style. And that way they never, either one never really encroach too far on the other, but they do have each other. And that is ultimately what the avoidant attachment style person wants, is that love and acceptance. They just kind of want their space, their personal space, and they don't want to feel smothered or controlled. So those are the three base attachment styles. There are a number of experts who break down avoidance into multiple different subcategories, but basically for the purposes of this video, those are the three. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the anxious attachment style today because that's what I have the most familiarity with, although I do also have experience in dealing with an avoidant attachment style person. But again, if you are someone with an anxious attachment style, or you think maybe you do, or maybe you're in a relationship with someone who clearly is exhibiting these symptoms, this video is going to be very, very helpful for you. So how does a guy like me, how do I show up in relationships, and how does my anxious attachment style affect my relationships? As I've already alluded, my ex-wife was indeed an avoidant attachment style person. Still is, she's just not with me. But she always wanted a lot of space. She didn't really want a lot of emotional intimacy. She did like sex, and people with the avoidant attachment style do often like the sex. They just don't want the emotional intimacy, that closeness. They never really want to let their guard down. And because she never really let her guard down, I was always trying to pull her closer. I craved that emotional intimacy and that connection, and I very rarely got it from her, which made me want it more. But the more I pulled her close, the more she retreated into her shell and tried to push me away. And it was basically a never-ending cycle. Now, neither of us, while we were married, were familiar with the concept of attachment styles. She may still not be familiar with that concept. I dove deep into that after she asked for a divorce so that I could better understand what had happened, because ultimately knowledge is power. And the fact that I'm now aware aware of my issues, just like an alcoholic who has that moment of clarity where they realize they're an alcoholic. They might still be drinking, but they're now 50% of the way towards fixing their issue because of that awareness. So I desperately wanted to understand why I was doing some of the things that I was doing. Maybe not so that I never ever repeated those things, although that would ultimately be the goal, but so that I could understand, explain, and sort of bring myself back down when I found myself getting anxious about things that somebody I was dating was doing. So how does it show up in my day-to-day life? I am indeed dating a woman right now. We've been dating for several months. We've had our ups and downs. We've had a couple of breakups. At one point, we used the term boyfriend and girlfriend. We're not doing that now. And at one point, we were dating exclusively, and we're not really doing that right now. But I don't think she's actually dating anybody else. But we haven't really made any commitment at this point. We're just trying to take things slowly, get to know each other better. We kind of rushed things at the outset of our relationship, and she started talking about engagement rings just a few months into dating and things like that, and it kind of escalated everything kind of in an abnormally fast way where we were talking about these really serious things and it felt really good, but we didn't really know each other very well yet. So we kind of are wanting to take a step back and really get to know each other and just hang out, enjoy each other's company, go on dates, have sex, and connect and get to know each other before we try and take things to the next level. And I do think that's a great strategy, and it does indeed seem to be working. We've been doing that for almost a month at this point, and there have been no issues in our relationship whatsoever, which was not the case before that. But how does my anxious attachment style show up with her? I would say that she probably has an anxious attachment style as well, which is good for me. I've learned that I do not do well with avoidant attachment style people who never let me in and who always keep me at arm's length and always make me second guess myself. I don't do well with that. But what I do find is, like, for instance, if I send her a text and she doesn't respond relatively quickly, my mind immediately starts jumping to conclusions and what is she doing? Who's she with? Why is she not responding? My mind starts creating scenarios out of thin air, basically, where I start thinking about possibilities that have no basis in reality. It's not like she's done things before that have warranted that level of fear and anxiety. It's just sort of how my brain is wired. So I have to intentionally think about, okay, well, there's no reason to jump to that conclusion. There's no reason to assume that. There's no reason to assume anything at this point. I don't have any information. And so I need to just let those thoughts go. As my therapist likes to say, have your thoughts, just don't invite them in for tea. So you are going to have uncomfortable thoughts, but you don't have to dwell on those. You don't have to let them linger. You don't have to play out scenarios in your head. Just take a deep breath, let them go, recognize that there's no basis for any level of conclusion at this point. And so it's silly to actually give any weight or credibility to thoughts that come into your head that have no basis in reality. Now, I will say that if you're dating a woman and she never responds to texts in a timely manner, that's a different scenario. And what that essentially means is that you're not that important to her. And that's a completely different problem, really, for a completely different video. Now, so far, all I've talked about are things that are affecting me. So how does my anxious attachment style actually interact with her? And what I'm going to say is that prior to our breakup and then reconnecting, my anxious attachment style did affect her greatly because I was putting expectations on her. I was kind of putting my fear and insecurity onto her, which isn't fair. I was placing expectations on her. I was jumping to conclusions and acting fearful and needy. That was making me look unattractive to her and ultimately pushing her away from me. And that, of course, triggers my anxious attachment style and makes me try and cling more tightly. So what I'm doing now that we've broken up and then reconnected is I'm not putting that on her. It's not fair of me to put my anxiety onto her. Now, if I'm acting a certain way and she picks up on it, I do think it's helpful for me to explain how my anxious attachment style is affecting me and how it's causing me to do certain things. I do think it's helpful information for her, but I don't want to dump that on her on any sort of regular basis. That is not masculine. It's not attractive. It's not going to make me more attractive to her. But I do think it's worth explaining on those rare occasions where maybe she picks up on my energy. So what I try and do now is I try and control my anxiety on my own without involving her and without doing or saying things to her that would allow her to pick up on that. And meditation for me is a great way to control that. I also do a lot of breath work too, though. Maybe I do box breathing, which is where you breathe in for a certain number, you hold it for a certain number, you breathe out for a certain number, you hold it for a certain number again, and then you just repeat that. Maybe you even increase the number where it kind of regulates your nervous system. And ultimately, that's what we're talking about here, is you self-regulating. You're learning to control control your thoughts, you're learning to control your body's nervous system and your anxiety, and you're learning to calm yourself down if things happen that create anxiety in you. Now, if she's actually doing something to create anxiety, if she's cheated on you before, then that's a completely different scenario because your fears are warranted. She's done something to trigger those fears in the past, and now if she cares about you, she should be going the extra mile to really make sure her behavior is above board and never doing anything to trigger you. And if she's not doing that, and again, if she has actually cheated on you in the past or done something really damaging like that, then it's probably not worth staying in a relationship with her. But in my case, the woman that I'm dating, she does definitely have some different ideas about relationships and things that I do. But what I'm learning to do, I'm learning to train myself to just be accepting and to not have expectations on her of how I think she should be. I have to love her and accept her for exactly who she is, or we're not going to work. And that's what I'm learning to do. That's what I'm focused on doing because I really do want a relationship with her in the long term. I really do see that. I think she does too. And we're trying to work on things slowly and not let our childhood baggage, because she definitely has some too, get in the way of forming our solid bond and forming a solid relationship that will last for years to come. The most important thing, if you have an anxious attachment style, is to find ways to deal with the anxiety. That could be exercise, it could be meditation, could be martial arts, could be yoga. Find an outlet that helps you self-regulate. Don't dump your problems onto your partner, again, unless they have done something that truly warrants your anxiety. And then in that case, I think, you have to decide whether you want to stay with them or not. But if they haven't actually done anything wrong, it's not fair of you to put all your anxiety and your expectations on them of how you think they should be behaving. That's just not fair, and your relationship is destined to fail if you do that. You've got to learn to control your own anxiety, regulate your feelings, recognize that thoughts that come into your head don't necessarily have any basis in reality, and you need to learn to let those go and not dwell on them. Don't play out scenarios in your head. If something happens, if you text her and she doesn't text back, don't play out scenarios of, what if she's doing this? What if she's out with somebody? What if she's doing this? Don't play those scenarios out in your mind, again, unless her history has shown that she will do those things. And that's a different problem than what I'm talking about right now. This video is admittedly a little bit free form. I'm just kind of going off the cuff. I don't have a typical outline like I normally do, but that is how my anxious attachment style shows up in relationships. Anyway, I hope you like this video. I'll see you in the next one.